We have talked often and long about the problems with the government-run schools, and we always urge people to more accurately describe them as the government-run schools rather than their preferred term of the public schools, because by design there is as little public as possible involved in the government-run schools. Here's an example of some of the people that are teaching your children in the government-run schools, and it may be hard to read here. A book they're using in the Los Angeles government-run schools called Occupied America, A History of Chicanos. I'm sure the children reading that will get a positive view of being an American citizen. Since 1950 to 2009, the number of students in the government-run schools went up 96%, teachers went up 252%, and non-teaching staff went up 702%, and they haven't been cut back since then. This chart shows that the blue line there going up is that, oops, let's go back. That's the after inflation cost of the government-run schools since 1970. The per pupil spending after adjusting for inflation has more than doubled. You see the yellow line for the employees, combined employees up almost 100%. Students are up about 5-6%, and you see the other lines are test scores, and they're down or at best flat. The chart on your right shows increases in California spending on the government-run schools since 2011, up 60%, with zero, not a none, improvement in the quality of the education, measured by the test scores on those flat lines you see across the chart. Then, of course, we've also talked about the XXX sex ed that's now in the government-run schools. Here's an example of the material that your children or grandchildren will encounter in the government-run schools. And here's some more of this stuff using vegetables, the condom relay race game, and other things that if you weren't in a government-run school and you were showing these kind of things and telling these kind of things to children, you'd be arrested as a sex offender if you were not in the government-run schools. Reforming them, we believe, is hopeless. The interests are so entrenched, and that the only choice is school choice. It's been tried, it's failed before, but we are not giving up, which leads us to our first main speaker tonight, Mike Alexander. Professionally, he does trust administration, pays the bills, keeps the lights on. He founded TPAC, a great Tea Party organization in Pasadena, and their specialty has been to put on local initiatives to repeal utility taxes in the cities, being the idea that if you want to make government smaller, make it smaller and cut off their money. And he's now taken on the huge challenge of drafting, organizing, and qualifying and passing a school choice initiative in California. We believe it can be done. We believe it needs to be done. And we're appreciative that Mike Alexander has stepped up to take the lead here. So we're going to turn it over to him here. And would you rather have the camera on the PowerPoint or yourself?
On me.
Okay. I'm going to turn the camera over to where Mike is going to be sitting. Mike Alexander.
Thank you, Greg. All right. My instructions were to sit back and look down here, but not upon you. Greg, Carolyn, thank you for inviting me here tonight and for setting up this meeting. It's always a pleasure to be back with the Redlands Patriots organization that was part of a family of organizations that kind of spun off from what we were all doing back in 2009 and 2010. And we will always remember the Tea Party as the only thing that Barack Obama could actually claim credit for, because he really did build that. And back then we used to like to say that every time he opened up his mouth, our phone rang, and it did. The crisis has actually become greater since 2008, and it's always very difficult at one of these meetings to settle on a topic and talk about it, because there's so much to talk about and because so much of it is actually interrelated. But let me take a stab at it right now. I was reviewing some essays the other day that I had started, and one is about modern gerrymandering that I think we need to master in order to understand where we are in the country. It was Gary, of course, in 1813, who first realized, even though he was one of our founding fathers, that he could achieve a more favorable electoral outcome if he could just redraw the districts and put more of his friends in one district and more of his enemies in another district and come out at an electoral advantage. So redrawing the district lines, so-called gerrymandering, acquired his title from Eldridge Gary. And we practice it now to today, and each and every state will reorganize and restate its electoral lines, its district lines, in order to accommodate the party in power. It has been ever thus. But there's another kind of modern gerrymandering that has come to dominate our political scene. Once upon a time, our Republican vision was that citizens would choose their representatives. Redistricting, or I should say gerrymandering most broadly, can be seen as a method by which representatives choose their constituents rather than the other way around. And redrawing is only one way to do it. In modern times, we have disregarded the district lines, we've disregarded our borders, and we've chosen instead to import new citizens into our country that behave and act like the dominant political party would like them to. This is another form of gerrymandering. Choose the citizens that you want wherever they come from. But the third kind of gerrymandering that I want to focus on tonight is the most difficult and pernicious form of gerrymandering, and it's called public so-called education, the government-run schools. If we look at what's happened in the United States, we see that merely redrawing the districts wasn't enough to give the forces of totalitarianism the power that they needed. They needed next to import people. But we also know that here in the United States, when people come into our culture and they meet real Americans and they encounter the opportunities, there is over time a tendency to become more conservative. To guard against all of that, the dominant totalitarian powers in our society have chosen a system of indoctrination to make sure that those students continue to think the thoughts that they want them to think, and most importantly, to vote the way that they are told to vote. What we have in modern times, for example, here in California, we have a vast enterprise that spends over $80 billion a year to educate, quote unquote, school, indoctrinate about 6 million K through 12 age children. They fail to do this. California is in the lower quintile, that is 40, 42, 48. However you want to characterize the race to the bottom that describes California schools. California is at the very bottom, despite spending more and more money every year, despite spending going up, net adjusted for inflation of almost 25% in the last 5 years. Education results, testing results haven't improved at all. And that's even by the low standards and the fixed test criteria that they deploy. And these students, as you know, even if they do gain a high school diploma from the system, are seldom able to matriculate to junior college even without significant additional remedial reading and remedial education. In fact, the situation is so bad that in California, the community colleges are no longer able to describe that remedial instruction as remedial instruction. It is designed, of course, to conceal the failure of the public schools. So we see that the major argument for the public schools is that is to educate the public in general and provide a basic grounding in reading, writing, arithmetic in the schools and the skills that people need for their matriculation into this world and their entry into the workplace and their participation in the political system is non-existent. On academic and pragmatic grounds, this system fails. Let's next talk about the moral failures. Greg here just a few minutes ago described the terrible conditions that we have in our schools, where the instructors, the administrative staff, the so-called teachers have completely usurped the role of parents and have chosen to educate their children about their vision of what man is and what sexuality is. I'm not going to dwell on that here. I'm sure that this audience, as active political people, know very well what's going on. The moral argument for the abolition of the public government school monopoly is compelling. Beyond that, of course, we have the political arguments against school. The fact is that our republic cannot survive if the government is going to educate all of its citizens. I ask you to consider this for a moment. What happens in millions of homes throughout the United States and in several million homes here in California. Each morning a child will get up in housing that was provided to him by the government. He will eat food, government-approved food, that's on the table for his consumption. He will wear clothes that is often provided by public subsidies called welfare and food stamps. He will get on public transportation, furnished, of course, by the government. He will travel to a government-owned and operated school where he will read government-approved texts that contain government-approved thoughts. He will engage in speech there that is approved by agents of the government. He will then be graded by the government. He will be told what sports he or she can engage in. Those will all have to be government approved. And at the end of the day, he will repeat the process, getting on government approved transportation, taking home government approved textbooks to study government approved assignments in that home, furnished by the government, eating food furnished by you and us and administered by the agents of government. And ladies and gentlemen, I want you to imagine this. After 18 years of doing that, our vision, our Republican vision, our American vision of the citizens running this country is eviscerated, having lived at the expense of the public and been taught to eat, drink, and yes, vote the way that the government tells him. It is impossible that at age 18, when he is now able to exercise the voter franchise, that he will then think thoughts and vote independently of the government. That is impossible. On political grounds, the public school monopoly must be abrogated. On religious grounds, the public school monopoly has failed to make its case. We now have a government school system that is deliberately anti-religious. It rejects the idea of God. It rejects any speech uttered by a student that contains the word God, a religious sentiment, or even a moment of silence. And what we have here is the same thing that we had in Nazi Germany, the same thing that we had in communist China or Soviet Russia. We have a place where God and the family have been supplanted by the government and its agents. There is no room for God in the modern public school monopoly. It must be eliminated. Our religious liberties, such as they are so fragile and at such a rapid rate that we must act now. The fifth compelling argument for the abolition of the public school monopoly is, of course, economic. This system is utterly inefficient, as will be any government institution that is not governed by some concept of competition. The public school system, like every other city, like every other county, like the entire state of California, is insolvent and bankrupt because it will be unable to pay its pension obligations when they become due. The public school system, like all branches of government, systematically and deliberately fails to properly state its pension obligations and consistently understates them with the active complicity of CalPERS or CalSTRS or the public pension management systems. There may be a few exceptions here, a few cities here and there, a few government entities here and there, but they are far below 1%. This system is presently, as well as prospectively, insolvent. It is time that we built a separate parallel educational infrastructure, controlled by parents and the community, so that when this calamity comes upon us, we will be able to continue to educate our children. What is the solution? There have been innumerable efforts over the last 50 to 75 years to bring about school choice, sometimes called the voucher system, sometimes called charter schools. Every attempt to reform the public schools has failed because it is, as a practical matter, impossible for anyone outside of an institution, particularly where it's a citizen on the outside of a government institution, to actually reform that institution. The only time that things change in America is when the consumer or the voter is given an actual choice. So any system, any proposal to eliminate the public school monopoly must embody the concept of choice. In 2022, California School Choice, in fact, for more information, go to californiaschoolchoice.org, all spelled out. You have some information there. Our website is improving. But our basic proposal is based upon one that was introduced a few years ago by Senator John Moorlach in Orange County. Entitled the Education Freedom Act in California, it will have 4 key features. Number 1, following the passage of the initiative, an educational savings account, known as an ESA, will be established for every K-12 student in the state of California. That's somewhere between 6 million and 6.5 million K-12 students. Number 2, each year that student's fund will be credited with an education scholarship amount equivalent under our current proposal to the pro rata amount being spent by the state of California under Proposition 98. Now that's a little bureaucrat speak. The money's coming in under Prop 98, which was passed back in the late 1980s, is based on about 40 to 50% of California tax revenues, and it currently generates around $12,500 per year per student. That amount of money would, number 3, be spendable, negotiated at any participating school, whether it's a public school, a private school, a charter school, and yes, even a parochial school. It would be the choice of the parents to send their children to an institution that is qualified and participating under the Act. And that would basically be any currently accredited school. That accreditation is currently carried out by independent institutions. And here is the 4th and most important feature of the Education Freedom Act, and that is any money left over can be used by the student to attend a college of his or her choice, including using that money for vocational training or other qualified expenses. This is revolutionary. School choice has been tried in a number of different ways in a number of different states, but this initiative that we are currently, that has been drafted and is being circulated on a pre-petition basis is revolutionary in its impact, revolutionary in introducing true competition into the system, and will inevitably increase both the quantity and the quality of education and schooling in the state of California. That is our proposal. I know that we may have questions here. I leaned forward. I'll stay back here. If you have questions here, I'm going to speak for just a few more moments. Then I'll take questions either from you or from those here talking in more detail about it. Now, what can you do to help? Our key form of organization is grassroots. That is something the TPAC has specialized in over the years, and that is something that the Redlands Patriots have repeatedly demonstrated their competence and mastery of, and that is grassroots organization. And what we have to focus on is very, very simply what we have to do to pass it. Let me just for a few minutes describe to you what how and why conservative initiatives tend to fail in California. What usually happens is that a couple of people get together with a really good idea, find some other people who agree with that idea, then they go find somebody with enough money to gather those signatures. Well, to amend the California State Constitution as we propose to do is going to require at least 800,000 signatures. We're going to be shooting for almost double that. But to get 800,000 signatures, we'll usually run $2, $3, $4, $5 million to run the organization during that time. This means, because of the size of the state, typically they reach out and hire professional signature gatherers to gather those signatures. That takes up the better part of a year, and by the time they qualify that initiative for the election year ballot, they're down into May or June or even July and August by the time they get through fighting with the various Democrat-controlled voter registrations, registrars of voters rather, and then in late August, September, October, then and only then do they begin the active part of the campaign to get out the vote, grassroots. And lo and behold, by that time, it's too late to start in a state the size of California and in the left-wing totalitarian opposition that controls massive amounts of union money. All they have to do is to spend that money in the media market, because by that time it has become a media battle in which their money has been granted leverage. The only way for us to take that leverage away from them is to start now. And so here's what I ask you to do. Go to californiaschoolchoice.org, make sure you sign up, make sure you sign the virtual petition. Give us a little love. You can't support school choice if you don't, guess what? Support school choice. Go on there for $1 a month, $5.50 or $500 if you got the bucks. But what I want you to do is even more important than that. I want you to become a leader in your local school, your parish, your synagogue, your congregation, your church, wherever you hang. I want you to become a leader. I want you to form a team, please. Get 3 other people, spread out over at least 2 families, so that if one of you gets sick or transferred, the other one would be able to pick up the ball and recruit the rest of the team. Find your friends, find other people, talk. It's a very simple campaign that's very easily explained. Ask them to sign your pre-petition. Get 100 people between the 4 of you, 25 each. Get those people organized. Get them up on the platform. Stay with them. in about a year to 18 months from now, we're going to ask you to go out and change those digital signatures to wet signatures on the actual initiative petition itself. And that signature gathering will begin in late December 2021 and early January 2022. That signature gathering effort will go on for 180 days. After that, they will be submitted prior to and qualified for the November 2022 ballot. And then what you have to do is to go out that same 100 people and more. Go out to the same 100 people. Tell them what you're doing. Reach out to them again and get them to the polls. And that's what we need to do in every school, every parish, every congregation, every church, every synagogue, and yes, every public school, because those people in that public school, and this will include a whole lot of Democrats out there, we have a lot in common with them. So for all of you conservative and Republicans who have been saying for years that we have a lot in common with Democrat voters out there, you're right. We have one thing in common, and that is the future of their children. Because our future, without their children being thoroughly American, being thoroughly literate, being thoroughly familiar with our form of government, our future is non-existent. So long as the government gets to tell them how to vote. And I'll submit to you, ladies and gentlemen, we know the fights that we have before us. We know how hard it's going to be to regain our freedoms, but we can't expect to regain control of the United States or to regain control of our government unless we first go back and regain control over our children. The biggest mistake we ever made in this country was 100 years ago when we turned our children over to them. After that, everything was inevitable. We reverse that, we reverse everything. It's been a pleasure speaking with you tonight. That'll conclude my formal remarks. Greg, do we have any online questions or inquiries, complaints? Can't you get somebody better looking?
Well, that was
right.
Well, that part of the better looking was directed to me. So.
Oh, okay, right. You're too modest, my friend.
Yeah. Well, I have some comments. One has said that
yes.
the problem really is the teacher unions. And it's certainly going to be a major obstacle in getting this passed and qualified because they will spend whatever they have to.
That's correct. Yes, they will. Let me give you a little bit of background on teacher unions, and the same thing applies to cop unions, fireman unions, SEIU, and every other kind of union. They take in vast amounts of money. In the California so-called Teachers Association, they have 300 to 350,000 members. Each of them pays $1,000 a year in dues. That comes to, if you went to one of their schools, you can't add, whip out your Obama phone and run the numbers there. That's $300 to $350 million per year. That is basically all political money. You don't ask me, Mike, how can you say that? Well, I didn't. Justice Gorsuch said that in his decision on Janus, which came out here a few years ago. But we know even though Janus' decision permitted school teachers and other union members to withdraw from mandatory dues payment and mandatory membership, their ranks have only declined by about 15%, as I predicted, because the money's just too good and the so-called teachers there are afraid to say anything. And every politician in every city, every assemblyman, state assemblyman, every state senator lives in mortal fear of the so-called teachers union because they will deploy money, men, arguably, and personnel to defeat anybody who opposes them.
Not omit the other genders.
Yeah, whatever, yeah. What is it, genderbread man, or something like that? Yeah, all this insanity. If you're tired of this insanity, get your kids back. But I don't want, what I want each of you to do there, I don't want you to take my word for it. And I don't want you to take counsel of your fears here, particularly fear of the teachers union. Our only hope to pass school choice in the state of California is if the California Teachers Association spends tens of millions of dollars and attacks us viciously. We're waiting for that. I'm trying to provoke them. Because in order to attack our proposal, they will have to tell you how you, the average Mexican family, and I didn't say Mexican American, I said these are Mexican parents, many of them, are too stupid to know what's best for their children. They're going to have to tell black parents that they're not sophisticated or smart enough to make decisions for their own children, that we, the school teachers, are. And they run the worst business in the country. Their customer service makes the DMV, look like, the Westin chain, or what was it, the Hilton hotels, the best hotels in the world. Their customer service is lousy. They hate their customers. They are the high-cost, low-quality solution. It'd be difficult to find a worse product or a worse group of people in the whole world than the bureaucrats and the union members that you find in the public so-called school system. Just saying. Any other questions or comments?
Keith asks, okay, let's say we pass this thing.
Yes.
What's going to keep it from getting overturned in the courts, like Proposition 8 on defense of marriage, or Prop 187 to deny illegal aliens government taxpayer paid for benefits?
Right. There's nothing to prevent that. But what we're seeing here, Keith, and we have to be cautious as conservatives. Conservatives are professional critics, where we see lack of hope, we see desperation, we're despondent. Oh, we can't do this, we can't do that. Hey, Keith, wake up. We're Americans. If we don't do this, we're done. We have to fight back at this. These matters will be taken to the courts, but the United States Supreme Court has already ruled in our favor on a number of these issues. I think that the most important thing that we can do is to create a political constituency that will not only pass this, but raise hell with anybody who attempts to unpass it. Remember the history of Proposition 13. Remember what a third rail in politics it was, so strong that even when they came up with a phony Proposition 13, the advocates of Proposition 13 were so firm, so diligent, so knowledgeable, so determined that they beat down the phony 13 put out there by Comrade Becerra. Do not fear.
Another question, also from Keith, is where is the California Republican Party on this effort?
Well, it's interesting. The California Republican Party, I have been informed, approved school choice as part of their platform. The problem, of course, is that the California Republican Party is no longer a viable political entity. So it is not a viable political entity, in large part because it has failed to embrace these kinds of issues. I think that we're in a not a postpartum, doctor, but a post-party phase in the state of California. We have moved into a totalitarian single-party state. Any political progress to be made in this state will be made outside of the partisan arrangements that we have and will be made by grassroots movements such as ours. And this is an extraordinary opportunity for us to reach out to people who think that we're nuts, that we hate them. Of course we don't. We're Americans. We embrace everybody. We want them to have the same chance because we realize that in our system, if everybody doesn't have a chance, then none of us has a chance. And I will say this, in the past 2 weeks, we saw our liberties taken. But I can assure you that they were lost long ago. And that loss of our liberties began with the loss of our children 100 years ago to the government schools. We must reverse that.
That exhausts our questions online. I don't know if you have any text questions. You don't have any text questions. So why don't you conclude by, again, telling people where they can contact you and getting involved in this great effort.
Thank you, Greg. Yes, once again, please go to californiaschoolchoice.org. You have complete contact information. If you want to speak with me, the number's there, the email's there. Send me hate mail, send me love mail, but don't ignore us. Just get involved. If you have suggestions, let me know. But we need you, and believe me, you need what we're doing here. And I want to thank Greg, John Barry, God bless you. The Chief and I have known each other for years. Carolyn, Doctor, thank you for being patient and listening to this diatribe here, but I hope that you will enjoy us. Thank all of you out there. I look forward to working with you. God bless.
Thank you, Mike.